Welcome to A Reason to Talk with Chris Reason. Today we are talking about the crimes of the lipstick killer, William Heirens. Let's get into today's bloody episode. This is A Reason to Talk with Chris Reason. William George Heirens was an American criminal and possible serial killer who under torture confessed to 3 murders. He was subsequently convicted of the crimes in 1946. Heirens was called the lipstick killer after a notorious message scrawled in lipstick at a crime scene at the time of his death. Heirens was reputedly Illinois' longest serving prisoner, having spent 65 years in prison. He spent the later years of his sentence at the Dixon Correctional Center in Dixon, Illinois, though he remained imprisoned until his death. Heirens had recanted his confession and claimed to be a victim of coerced interrogation and police brutality. Charles Einstein wrote a novel called The Bloody Spur about Heirens, published in 1953, which was adapted into the 1956 film While the City Sleeps by Fritz Lang. On March 5, 2012, Heirens died at the age of 83 at the University of Illinois Medical Center from complications arising from diabetes. His story was the subject of a 2018 episode of the Investigation Discovery series, A Crime to Remember. Heirens grew up in Lincolnwood, a suburb of Chicago, Illinois. He was the son of George and Margaret Heirens. George Heirens was the son of immigrants from Luxembourg, and Margaret was a homemaker. His family was poor, and his parents argued insistently, I can't talk anymore, leading Heirens to wander the streets to avoid hearing them. He took to crime and later claimed that he mostly stole for fun and to release tension. He never sold what he had stolen. At age 13, Heirens was arrested for carrying a loaded gun. A subsequent search of the Harrison's home discovered a number of stolen weapons hidden in a storage shed on the roof of a nearby building, along with furs, suits, cameras, radios, and jewelry he had stolen. Heirens confessed to 11 burglaries and was sent to the Gilbald School for Wayward Boys of several months. Now, soon after, he was arrested for theft and sentenced to 3 years at the St. Bede Academy, where he was an exceptional student. He was accepted into University of Chicago's Special Learning Program just before his release in 1945 at age 16. To pay for his expenses, he worked several evenings a week as an usher and docent. He also resumed committing burglaries. A classmate remembers him as being popular with girls. June 5, 1945, 43-year-old Josephine Ross was found dead in a Chicago apartment. She had been repeatedly stabbed, and her head was wrapped in a dress. Dark hairs were clutched in her hand. No valuables were taken from the apartment. Police were unable to identify a dark-haired man reportedly seen running from the building. On December 10, 1945, Frances Brown was discovered with a knife lodged in her neck and bullet wound to the head in her apartment. Nothing was taken, but a message was written in lipstick on the wall. For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself. Police found a bloody fingerprint smudged on the door jamb of the entrance door. A witness heard gunshots around 4 a.m., and the building's night clerk said a nervous-looking man of 35 to 40 years old and weighing 140 pounds, got off the elevator and left around the time. At one point, Chicago police said they had reason to believe the killer was a woman. On January 7, 1946, a 6-year-old Suzanne Degnan, however you pronounce that, was discovered missing from her first-floor bedroom in Edgewater, Chicago. Police found a ladder outside her window and a ransom note. Get $20,000 ready and wait for my word. Do not notify the FBI or police. Bills are in 5s and 10s. Burn this for her safety. Man repeatedly called the Deegan residence demanding the ransom. Chicago Mayor Edward Kelly also received a note. This is to tell you how sorry I am not to not get old sick Deegan instead of this girl. Roosevelt and the OPA made her own laws. Why shouldn't I? And a lot more. At the time, there was a nationwide meatpacker strike at the Office of Price Administration, the OPA, was taking was talking of extending rationing to dairy products. Degnan was a senior OPA executive recently transferred to Chicago. Another executive of the OPA had been recently assigned armed guards after receiving threats against his children. And in Chicago, a man involved with black market meat had recently been murdered by decapitation. Police considered the possibility that the Deignan killer was a meat packer. Acting on an anonymous tip, police discovered Deignan's head in a sewer a block from the Deignan residence, her right leg in a catch basin, her torso in another storm drain, and her left leg in another drain. Her arms were found, and a month later in another sewer. Blood was found in the drains of laundry tubs in the basement laundry room of a nearby apartment building. Police questioned hundreds of people, gave polygraph examinations to about 170, and several times claimed to have captured the killer, though all were eventually released. The coroner fixed the time of death between 12:30 and 1 a.m. and stated that a very sharp knife had been used to expertly dismember a body. A basement laundry room near the Deignan's home was located in which it appeared that Deignan had been dismembered, though it was determined that she was already dead when she was taken there. Excuse me. A expert stated coroner's expert stated that the killer was either a man who worked in a profession that required the study of anatomy or one with a background in dissection. Not even the average doctor could be as skillful. It had to be a meat cutter. The coroner added that it was a very clean job with absolutely no signs of hacking. 65-year-old Hector Verberg, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, a janitor in the building where Deignan lived, was arrested and treated as a suspect. Police told the press this is the man, despite discrepancies between Verberg's profile and the one that was developed by them as to what kinds of skills the killer had, including him having surgical knowledge or at least being a butcher. Police cited such evidence as Verberg's frequenting the so-called murder room, and the grimy state of the ransom note suggested it was written by dirty hands such as that of a janitor. The police pressured Verberg's wife to implicate her husband in the murder. Police had Verberg for 48 hours of questioning and beatings that severely injured him, including a separated shoulder. Throughout, Verberg denied involvement in the murder. Verberg's janitor union lawyer got Verberg released on a writ of, I'm going to butcher this, habeas corpus. Verberg said of the experience, "Oh, they hanged me up. The blindfolded me. I can't put my arms up my arms. They are sore. They had handcuffs on me for hours and hours. They threw me in the cell and blindfolded me. They handcuffed my hands behind my back and pulled me up on bars until my toes touched the floor. I no eat. I go to the hospital. Oh, I am so sick anymore, and I would have confessed to anything." Verberg spent 10 days in the hospital. It was determined that Verberg, a Belgian immigrant, couldn't write English well enough, even be the crude standards of the ransom note itself, for him to have written it. He successfully sued the Chicago Police Department for $15,000. His wife received $5,000. Another notable false lead was that of Sidney Sherman, a recently discharged Marine who had served in World War II. Police had found blonde hairs in the back of the Deignan apartment building, and nearby was a wire that authorities suspected could have been used as a garrote to strangle Suzanne Deignan. Near that was a handkerchief the police suspected might have been used as a gag to keep Suzanne quiet. On the handkerchief was a laundry marked name, S. Sherman. The police hoped that perhaps the killer had erred in leaving it behind. They searched military records and discovered that Sidney Sherman lived at the Hyde Park YMCA. The police went to question Sherman, but discovered that he had vacated the residence without checking out and quit his job without picking up his last paycheck. A nationwide manhunt ensued. Sherman was found 4 days later in Toledo, Ohio. He explained under interrogation that he had eloped with his girlfriend and denied that the handkerchief was his. He was administered a polygraph test, which he passed and was later cleared. The handkerchief's real owner, Airman Seymour Sherman of New York City, was eventually found. He had been out of the country when Suzanne Deignan was murdered. He had no idea how it could possibly have ended up in Chicago, and the presence of the handkerchief was determined to be a coincidence. After Suzanne Deignan's disappearance, the Deignan residents received phone calls demanding ransom. A local boy, Theodore Campbell, later said that another local teenager, Vincent Costello, had killed Deignan. Costello, who lived a few blocks from the Deignan's house, had been convicted of an armed robbery at age 16 and sent to reform school. Campbell said that the Costello admitted to kidnapping and killing Suzanne Deignan. and had told him to make the calls to the Deegans. Costello was arrested by polygraph, but polygraph tests indicated that neither Campbell nor Costello had knowledge of the murder. In February of 1946, Suzanne Deegan's arms were found by sewer workers about a half a mile from her home after her remains had already been interred. By April, some 370 suspects had been questioned and cleared. By this time, the press was taking an increasingly critical tone as to how the police were handling the Deegan investigation. Richard Russell Thomas was a nurse living in Phoenix, Arizona, having moved from Chicago. At the time of the Chicago investigation, he was imprisoned in Phoenix for molesting one of his own daughters, but he was in Chicago at the time of the Deegan murder. A handwriting expert for the Phoenix Police Department first informed Chicago authorities of the great similarities between Thomas's handwriting and that of the Deegan ransom note, noting that many of the phrases Thomas had used in an extortion note were similar, and his medical training as a nurse matched the profile suggested by police. Although Thomas lived on the south side, he frequented a car yard directly across the street from where Suzanne Deegan's arms were found. During questioning by Chicago police, he freely admitted to killing Suzanne Deegan. However, the authorities were intrigued by a promising new suspect reported to the paper the same day the Thomas development broke. A college student was caught fleeing from the scene of a burglary, brandished a gun at police, and possibly tried to kill one of the pursuing policemen to escape. By this time, Thomas had recanted his confession, but the press didn't notice in light of this new lead. On June 26, 1946, a 17-year-old William Heirens was arrested for attempted burglary. According to Heirens, the drifted unconscious under questioning was interrogated around the clock for 6 consecutive days. Beaten and starved, he was not allowed to see his parents for 4 days. He was also refused the opportunity to speak to a lawyer for 6 days. Two psychiatrists, Drs. Haynes and Roy Grinker, gave Heirens sodium pentothal without a warrant and without Heirens or his parents' consent, and interrogated him for 3 hours. Under the influence of the drug, authorities claimed Heirens spoke of an alternate personality named George, who had actually committed the murders. Heirens claimed that he recalled little of the drug-induced interrogation and that was police asked for George's last name. He said he couldn't remember, but that it was a murmuring name. Police translated this to Merman, and the media later just dramatized it to Murder Man. What Heirens actually said is in dispute, as the original transcript has disappeared. In 1952, Grinker revealed that Heirens had never implicated himself in any of the killings. On his 5th day in custody, Heirens was given a lumbar puncture without anesthesia. Moments later, Heirens was driven to police headquarters for a polygraph test. They tried for a few minutes to administer the test, but it was rescheduled for several days later after they found him to be in too much pain to cooperate. When the polygraph was administered, authorities, including State's Attorneys William Toohey, announced that the results were inconclusive. On July 2, 1946, he was transferred to the Cook County Jail, where he was placed in the infirmary to recover. After the sodium pentothal questioning, but before the polygraph exam, Heirens spoke to Captain Michael Aaron with State's Attorney William Toohey and a stenographer at hand. Heirens offered an indirect confession confirming his claim, while under sodium pentothal, that his alter ego George Merman might have been responsible for the crimes. That George, which happens to be his father's name and Heirens his middle name, given him the loot to hide in his dormitory room. Wow, I can't pronounce that right. Police hunted all over this for George, questioning Heirens' known friends, family, and associations, but came away empty-handed. Heirens was attributed as saying while under the influence that he met George when he was 13 years old, that it was George who sent him out prowling at night, that he robbed for pleasure and killed like a cobra when concerned. cornered, sorry. George related his secrets to Heirens. Heirens allegedly claimed that he was always taking the rap for George, first for petty theft, then assault, and now murder. Psychologists explained at the time, in the same way children make up imaginary friends. Heirens made up this personality to keep his antisocial feelings and actions separate from the person who could be the average son and student, date nice girls, and go to church. Authorities were skeptical regarding Heron's claims and suspected that he was laying the groundwork for an insanity defense, but the confession earned widespread publicity, with the press transforming Merman to Murder Man. While handwriting analysts did not definitively link Heron's handwriting to the LiPsTiCk message, police claimed that his fingerprints matched a print discovered at the scene of the Frances Brown murder. It was first reported as a bloody smudge on the door jamb. Furthermore, a fingerprint on the left little finger also allegedly connected Heron's to the ransom note, with 9 points of comparison. As Heron's 9 points of comparison were loops, this could also provide a match to 65% of the population. At the time, Heron's supporters pointed out the FBI handbook regarding fingerprint identification required 12 points of comparison matching to have positive identification. June 30th, 1946, Captain Emmett Evans told newspapers that Heron's had been cleared of suspicion in the Brown murder, as the fingerprint left in the apartment was not his. 12 days later, Chief of Detectives Walter Storms confirmed that the bloody smudge left in the door jamb was Heron's. Police searches of Heron's residence and college dormitory found other items that earned publicity. Notably recovered was a scrapbook containing pictures of Nazi officials that belonged to a war veteran, Harry Gold, that was taken from when Heron's burglared his place the night Suzanne Deegan was killed. Gold lived in the vicinity of the Deegans. This once again put Heron's in the circle of suspicion. Also in Heron's possession was a stolen copy of a Psychopathy Sexualis, 1886, Richard von Krafft-Ebing's famous study of sexual deviance. In addition, among Heron's belongings, police discovered a stolen medical kit, but they announced that the medical instruments could not be linked to the murders. No trace of biological material such as blood, skin, or hair were found in the tools. Moreover, no biological material of the victims was found on Heron's himself or any other of his clothes. The medical kit tools were considered to be too fine, small to be used for dissection. Instead, Heron's had used the 4-inch long medical kit to alter the war bonds he stole. A gun was found in his possession that was linked to a shooting. A Colt police-positive revolver had been stolen in a burglary at the apartment of Guy Roderick on December 3, 1945. 2 nights later, a bullet crashed through the closed 8th-floor apartment window of Marion Caldwell, wounding her. Heron's that had that gun in his possession, and according to the Chicago Police Department, the bullet that injured Caldwell was linked through ballistics to the same gun. A witness told police he saw a figure walking toward the Deegan residence with a shopping bag. He described the man as 5 feet 9 inches tall, 170 pounds, 35 years old, and wearing a light-colored fedora and a dark overcoat, but could not make out the man's face. The witness did not recognize a photo of Heron's as showing the man he saw, but a few days later he identified Heron's in person at a court hearing. Before the trial, inconsistencies in the witness's original statement had led many to dismiss his evidence. In court, it was pointed out that the witness told police that the darkness had prevented his seeing the man's face. While in court, he testified that he had seen Heron's walk in front of a car's headlights. Heron's defense attorneys felt he was guilty. Their task, they believed, was to save Heron's from the electric chair. Toohey, on the other hand, was not certain he could get a conviction. The small likelihood of a successful murder prosecution of William Heirens early prompted the state's attorney's office to seek out and obtain the cooperative help of defense counsel, and through them, that of their client. All of the prosecution had in the Deegan case was a partial fingerprint on the ransom note, and it was the stage of the investigation that defense counsel moved forward to cooperation with my office. And that's from the state attorney, Toohey. Heron's lawyers pressured him to take Toohey's plea bargain. That deal, which was the topic of the closed-door meeting with Toohey, stated that Heirens would serve 1 life sentence if he confessed to the murders of Josephine Ross, Frances Brown, and Suzanne Deegan. With the help of his lawyers, he began drafting a confession using the Chicago Tribune article as a guide. As it turned out, the Tribune article was very helpful it was very helpful as it provided me with a lot of details I didn't know. My attorneys rarely change anything outright, but I could tell by their faces if I had made a mistake. Or they would say, "Now, Bill, is that really the way it happened?" Then I would change my story because obviously it went against what was known in the Tribune. Both Heirens and his parents signed a confession. The parties agreed to a date of July 30th for Heirens to make an official confession. On that date, the defense went to Tuohy's office, where several reporters were assembled to ask Heirens questions and where Tuohy himself made a speech. Heirens appeared bewildered and gave non-committal answers to reporters' questions, which he years later blamed on Tuohy. It was Tuohy himself, after assembling all the officials, including attorneys and policemen. He began a preamble about how long everyone had waited to get a confession from me. But at last, the truth was going to be told. He kept emphasizing the word truth, and I asked him if he really wanted the truth. He assured me that he did. Now, Tuohy made a big deal about hearing the truth. Now, when I was being forced to lie to save myself, it made me angry. So I told him the truth, and everyone got upset. Tuohy withdrew the previously agreed sentence of 1 life term with a few minor charges, changed it to 3 life terms to run consecutively, and threatened Heirens with the death penalty if he went to trial. They threatened to charge him with another murder, Estelle Carey, even though Heirens was attending the Gilbert School of Wayward Boys, a boarding school in the Terre Haute, Indiana, at the time. Heirens' own attorneys were angry at their client for reneging on the plea bargain, spurring the Chicago Tribune headline, "Mute Heirens Faces Trial. KiLlEr spurns mother's fervent plea to talk." Tuohy announced that he would press ahead to try Heirens for the deaths of Suzanne Deegan and Frances Brown. Heirens agreed with the new plea argument that public allocation was held again in Tuohy's office. This time Heirens talked and answered questions, even reenacting parts of the murders to which he had confessed. Heirens changed his opinion and believed he was culpable when he heard how familiar Heirens was with the victim Frances Brown's apartment. Heirens said later, "I confessed to save my life." In his confession, Heirens stated that he disposed of the hunting knife with which he said he cut up Suzanne Deegan on the elevated subway tracks near the scene of the murder. The police never searched the L tracks. However, learning of this, reporters inquired with the track crew if they had found a knife. They had found it on the tracks, and that they kept it in the Granville Station storage room. The reporters determined that the knife belonged to Guy Roderick, the same person who had his cult police positive .22 caliber gun stolen and found in Heirens' possession. July 31st, he positively identified the knife as his. Heirens acknowledged that he threw the knife there from the NL train, claiming he didn't want his mother to see it. Heirens took full responsibility of the 3 murders on August 7, 1946. The prosecution had him reenact the crime in the Deegan home and in public and in front of the press. September 4th, with Heirens' parents and the victims' families attending and Chief Justice Harold G. Ward presiding. Heirens admitted his guilt on the burglary and murder charges. That night, Heirens tried to hang himself in his cell. Jesus Christ. Time to coincide during a shift change of the prison guards. He was discovered before he died. He said later that despair drove him to attempt suicide. Everyone believed I was guilty if I weren't alive. I felt I could avoid being judged guilty by the law and thereby gain some victory, but I wasn't successful even at that. Before I walked in the courtroom, my counsel told me to just enter a plea of guilty and keep my mouth shut afterward. I didn't even have a trial. September 5th, after further evidence was written into the record and the prosecution and defense had made their closing statements, Ward formally sentenced Heirens to 3 life terms. As Heirens waited to be transferred to Stateville Prison from the Cook County Jail, Sheriff Michael Mulkey asked Heirens if Suzanne Deegan suffered when she was killed. Heirens answered, "I can't tell you if she suffered, Sheriff Mulkey. I didn't kill her. Tell Mr. Deegan to please look after his other daughter before whoever killed Susan is still out there." Within the days of confession in open court, Heirens denied any responsibility for the murders. Mary Jane Blanchard, daughter of murder victim Josephine Ross, was one of the first dissenters, being quoted in 1946 as saying, "I cannot believe that young Heirens murdered my mother. He just does not fit into the picture of my mother's death. I have looked at all the things Heirens stole, and there was nothing of my mother's things among them." Heirens was subjected to an interrogation under the influence of sodium pentothal, popularly known as the truth serum. This drug was administered by psychiatrists Haynes and Roy Grinker. Under its effects, he allegedly stated that a second person named George Merman actually committed the killings, like we said before. The form of interrogation, which was done without a warrant and administered with neither Heirens nor his parents' consent, is believed by most scientists today to be a dubious value in eliciting the truth due to high suggestibility of subjects under the influence of such substances. By the 1950s, most scientists had declared the very notion of the truth serums invalid, and most courts had ruled testimony gained through their use inadmissibly. However, when Heirens was arrested in 1946, growing scientific opinion against truth serum had not yet filtered down the courts and police departments. During Heirens' post-conviction petition in 1952, Toohey admitted under oath that he not only knew about the sodium pentothal procedure, he had authorized it and paid Grinker $1,000. The same year, Grinker revealed that Heirens never implicated himself in any of the killings. In 1946, after Heirens underwent 2 polygraph examinations, Toohey declared the results inconclusive. However, John E. Reed and Fred E. Inbow published the test findings in their 1953 textbook, Lie Detection and Criminal Interrogation, which seemed to contradict that assertion. According to the book, the test was not inconclusive, writing murder suspect William Heirens was questioned about the killing and dismemberment of 6-year-old Susan Deegan. On the basis of the conventional testing theory, his response on the card test clearly establishes him as an innocent person. During the Deegan murder investigation, the Chicago Police Department contacted Chicago Daily News artist Frank San Hamill to examine a photograph of the ransom note. 3 days after the murder, Hamill told the police and the public that he had found hidden indentation writing impressions from the note written on an overlying piece of paper, leaving a ghostly impression. At this news, storms broke the chain of custody and provided Hamill with the original note for him to examine directly. Since that chain of custody was broken by his action, the note was rendered useless in court no matter the result. After Heirens was arrested for the Deegan killing, Hamill reported that they implicated him. The FBI had previously issued a report on March 22, 1946 that it examined the note and declared that there was no indentation writing at all, and Hamill's assertions indicated either a lack of knowledge of his part or a deliberate attempt to deceive. Even the actual handwriting on the note has been apparently discredited. Most handwriting experts, both attached to the Chicago Police and independent at the time of the original investigation, believe that Heirens had no connections to either the note or the wall scribble. Charles Wilson, who was head of the Chicago Crime Detection Laboratory, declared Heirens' known handwriting examples obtained from Heirens' handwritten notes from college agreed with the police department experts who could not find any connection between Heirens, the note, and the wall message. Independent handwriting expert George W. Schwartz was brought in to give his opinion. He stated that flatly that the individual characteristics in the two writings do not compare in any respect. A third handwriting expert, Herbert J. Walter, whose credentials include working on the Lindbergh baby kidnapping in 1932, was brought in. After examining documents written by Heirens, Walter declared that the Heirens wrote this ransom note and the LiPsTiCk scrawl on the wall and attempted to disguise his handwriting. However, this was in direct contradiction to what he said several months before, at which time he said he doubted that the two writings were authored by the same person. He was quoted as saying there were a few superficial similarities and a great many dissimilarities. In 1996, FBI handwriting analyst David Grimes declared that Heirens' known handwriting did not match either the Deegan ransom note or the infamous LiPsTiCk message, supporting the two earlier results of the original 1946 investigation and Herbert J. Walter's original January 1946 opinion. In addition, the handwriting of the two notes don't match each other. Among evidence suggesting Heirens' guilt is the fingerprint evidence on the Dignan ransom note and on the door jamb of Frances Brown's bathroom door. However, suspicions on the veracity of door jamb fingerprints found at the Brown crime scene have arisen, including charges that the police planted in the fingerprint since it allegedly looks like a rolled fingerprint, that type that you would find on a police fingerprint index card. Both sets of prints have come under serious question as to their validity, good faith collection, and possible contamination, even the possibility of them being planted. On or around June 26, 1946, State Attorney Toohey announced that there can be no doubt now as to Heirens' guilt after the authorities linked Heirens' prints to the two prints on the ransom note. It was this assertion, unchallenged by Heirens' defense counsel at sentencing, that helped prompt him to confess the murders of which he was charged. In a 2002 clemency petition, however, his lawyers questioned the validity of these prints on the ransom note due to the timing of discoveries of fingerprints on the card, the broken chain of evidence, and its handling by both inexperienced law enforcement and civilians. The Dignan ransom note was first examined by the Chicago Crime Detection Laboratory, but they couldn't find any usable prints. Captain Timothy O'Connor took the note to the FBI Crime Laboratory in Washington, D.C. on January 18, 1946, with the idea of enlisting the FBI's more sophisticated technology in finding any Latin prints. The FBI subjected the note to the then advanced method of iodine fuming to raise Latin prints. The process was similar in execution to today's polycyclate superglue fuming, in which is headed to a vapor. This vapor sticks to the skin oils on the friction ridges of a Latin fingerprint. The older 9 method, which is liquid that is sprayed on paper to detect Latin prints on paper, is similar. The FBI were able to raise two prints, which they photographed promptly because, unlike modern usage, fuming prints reveal that by the iodine process fade quickly. Captain O'Connor later testified at Heirens' sentencing hearing that he only saw two prints on the front of the note and did not mention the existence of any on the back. Upon his return to Chicago, he turned after the photographs of the revealed prints on the note to Sergeant Thomas Leafy, the Chicago Police Department's fingerprint expert. After his examination, he stated to the press that they were so incomplete that it is impossible to classify them. Despite checking these incomplete prints with everyone arrested between January 1946 and June 29, 1946, he was unable to find a match even though William Heirens was previously arrested and fingerprinted on May 1, 1946, on a weapons charge. Heirens was arrested for burglary on June 26, 1946. 3 days later, Sergeant Leafy announced a 9-point comparison match to Heirens' left little finger with one of the prints. Then a match was announced between Heirens and the second print in a news conference. State's Attorney Toohey declared that there could be no doubt now about the suspect's guilt, but that incongruously also stated that they didn't actually have enough evidence to indict Heirens. Months after the FBI had returned the note and the photograph of the note to the Chicago police, the police announced that Leafy had discovered a palm print on the reverse side of the note, also matching Heirens to 10 points of comparison. No other prints were found on the note, prompting Police Chief Walter Storm to say this shows that Heirens was the only person to handle the note. This declaration is suspicious to some because the Chicago police couldn't find any prints originally, hensing the necessity to send the ransom note to the FBI for further processing, indicating that they were incapable of finding it in the first place. Captain O'Connor only mentioned the two prints on the observed side of the note and none of the reverse. Further, since both sides of the note are photographed immediately after fuming by the FBI, and third print on the reverse side would have been obvious on the note itself at the time of the development of the photograph of the note. Yet, despite the testing occurring in mid-January, this third print was discovered until early July, 6 months later, and approximately 2 weeks after Heirens was arrested, despite Leafy working on the Dignan case almost exclusively for 6 months. And the original note was previously given to Chicago Daily News reporter Frank Sanhamel the previous January, after the FBI had processed it, to examine in to find any hidden indentation in writing that Heirens supposedly left. This broke the chain of custody, making the note inadmissibly as evidence in court. Additionally, any number of people, including Hamill, had compromised the integrity of any prints on the note, depositing additional prints and obscuring and corrupting the prints of the culprit. Indeed, even before the police crime lab got a chance to examine the note, Charles Wilson, the chief of Chicago Crime Detection Laboratory, stated, "When we got the Deignan note, it came late after other people had photographed it and handled it. In the same vein, on March 22, 1946, FBI reported a note. It is evident that the note has been handled considerably." These statements are in direct contradiction to Chief Walter Storm's assertion that no one else but Heirens handled the note. Further, Leahy testified that during the September 5, 1946 sentencing hearing that one more fingerprint on the reverse side of the note was linked to Heirens to 10 points of comparison. He also increased the points of comparison of the palm print to Heirens from 10 to the FBI standard of 12. As the fingerprints on the front of the note were discovered by the FBI in January 1946, Leahy only identified one, and it did not say it belonged to Heirens when he testified at the sentencing hearing. Only the prints not found by the FBI and allegedly discovered after Heirens' arrest were mentioned at the sentencing hearing, and not the two front prints that were supposedly indisputable proof of Heirens' culpability. They were hardly mentioned, nor were they linked to Heirens in a court hearing in which the witnesses had to testify under oath. As a further indication of what could be called ineffective defense by Heirens' lawyers, none of these issues were raised at the sentencing hearings, and no objections were made, nor did they bring up chain of custody issues. A bloody smudge print of an end and a middle joint of a finger was found on the door jamb of a door between the bathroom and dressing room in Francis Brown's apartment. A photograph of the print was taken, but no match was made with anything on file. After Heirens was arrested on June 26, his prints were compared with the Deignan note. When Leahy claimed a match with Heirens and the prints on the Deignan note, an attempt was made to match him with the door jamb print. It was unsuccessful, and the police declared him cleared of the Brown murder because of the print at the crime scene was not his. 12 days later, however, it was declared to match Heirens' prints to 22 points of comparison, well above the FBI standard. At Heirens' sentencing, Leahy testified that the end of joint of the bloody print an 8-point comparison to Heirens, and the middle joint a 6-point comparison. The middle joint didn't live up to Leahy's personal standard of 7 or 8 points to make a positive identification match. Another source of contention is that the Brown crime scene fingerprint has the appearance of having been rolled, which is the practice of taking a person's inked finger and rolling it on an index card, and not the smudge, bloody, or unreadable print as originally reported. Traditionally, after the fingertip is covered in a link from either the suspect's hand being pressed on the top of an ink pad or an ink roller being run across it, the finger is placed on the card on one edge. It is rolled once from one edge to the finger's other edge to produce a large, clear print. Heirens' attorneys did not question the veracity of the prints. However, 29 inconsistencies have been found between his confession and the known facts of the crime. It has since become the understanding that the nature of these inconsistencies is a clear indicator of false confessions. Some details did seem to match, like the police theory that Suzanne Deignan was dismembered by a hunting knife, and Heirens confessed to throwing a hunting knife onto a section of the Chicago subway L trestle near the Deignan residence. However, it was determined significantly that it was at least the dismemberment tool, and Heirens had an alternate explanation for it. Further, it was not initially recovered by the police, but members of the press, who recovered it from the transit track gang who found it. After the Deignan murder, but before Heirens became a suspect, Chicago police interrogated 42-year-old Richard Russell Thomas, a drifter passing through the city of Chicago at the time Deignan's murder, found in the Maricopa County Jail in Phoenix, Arizona. Police handwriting expert Charles B. Arnold, head of the forgery detail of the Phoenix police in Thomas' hometown of Phoenix, noted similarities between the handwritten Deignan ransom note and Thomas's handwriting when Thomas wrote with his left hand, and suggested Chicago police investigate Thomas. Upon being questioned, Thomas confessed to the crime, but he was released from custody after Heirens became the prime suspect. Others contend that Thomas was a strong suspect given that Thomas previously had been convicted of an attempt extortion attempted extortion with a ransom note that threatened the kidnapping of a little girl. As previously noted, and handwritten experts at the time stated that the Thomas ransom note from his previous conviction of extortion bears similarity in both style in regard to the woman wording and in form of the actual structure of the letters formed into the Dignan ransom note. Thomas was in Chicago at the time of the Dignan murder. At the time he confessed to the Dignan crime, he was awaiting sentencing for molesting his daughter. Thomas had a history of violence, including spousal abuse. Thomas was a nurse who was known to masquerade as a surgeon. He often boasted to his friends that he was a doctor, and he was known to steal surgical supplies. Chicago police had previously developed a profile to the Dignan killer as having surgical skills or being a butcher. He frequented a car agency near the Dignan residence. Parts of Suzanne Dignan's body were found in a sewer across the street from the car agency. Like Heirens, he was a known burglar. He had confessed freely to the Dignan murder, although he later recanted. The Chicago detectives dismissed Thomas's claims after Heirens became a suspect. Thomas died in 1974 in an Arizona prison. His prison record and most of the evidence of his interrogation regarding the Chicago murders had been lost or destroyed. George Hodel is also a prominent suspect according to the findings of his son and former LAPD officer Steve Hodel, who was attempted to link him to the Black Dahlia murder and the Zodiac Killer murders. Soon after Heirens was arrested, his parents and younger brother changed their surname to Hill. His parents divorced after his conviction. Heirens was first housed at Stateville Prison in Joliet, Illinois. He learned several trades, including electronics and television and radio repair. At one point, he had his own repair shop. Before a college education was available to prison inmates, Heirens, on February 6, 1972, became the first prisoner in Illinois history to earn a 4-year college degree, receiving a Bachelor of Arts degree, later earning 250 course credits by funding the cost of correspondence courses with 20 different universities from his savings. Passing courses as varied as languages, analytical geometry, data processing, and tailoring. He was forbidden by authorities to take courses in physics, chemistry, or celestial navigation. He managed the garment factory of Stateville for 5 years, overseeing 350 inmates, and after transfer to Vienna Correctional Center, he set up their entire educational program. He aided other prisoners' educational progress by helping them earn their general educational development diplomas and becoming a jailhouse lawyer of sorts, helping them with their appeals. Heirens was given institutional parole for the Dignan murder in 1965, and in 1966 he was discharged in that case and began serving his second life sentence. Although not freed, parole policies of the day meant that he was considered rehabilitated by prison authorities and that the Dignan case could no longer legally be put forward as a reason to deny parole. Based on the regulations of 1946, Heirens should have been discharged from the Brown murder in 1975 and from all remaining charges in 1983. However, in 1973, the focus moved from rehabilitation to punishment and deterrence, which blocked moves to release Heirens. 1983, the 7th District U.S. Court of Appeals ruled that it was unconstitutional to refuse parole on deterrence grounds to inmates convicted before 1973. Magistrate Gerald Cohn ordered Illinois to release Heirens immediately. The brother and sister of Suzanne Dignan went public, pleading with the authorities to fight the ruling. Attorney General Neil Hartigan stated only God and Heirens know how many other women he murdered. Now a bleeding heart do-gooder decides that Heirens is rehabilitated and should go free. I'm going to make sure that the killed, crazed animal stays where he is. A sentiment supported by the media, the Illinois Senate passed a resolution that as the confessed murder of Suzanne Dignan, a 6-year-old girl who was strangled in 1946, that is the opinion of the chamber that the release of William Heirens at this time would be determinatory to the best interest of the people of the state. With the support of prominent politicians, the 1983 court ruling was later reversed. In 1975, he was transferred to the minimum security Vienna Correctional Center in Vienna, Illinois, and then in 1998, upon his request to the Dixon Correctional Center, minimum security prison in Dixon, Illinois. He resided in the hospital ward. He suffered from diabetes, which had swollen his legs and limited his eyesight making him have to use a wheelchair. He continued with his efforts to win clemency. In 2002, Lawrence C. Marshall, E.T., filed a petition on Heirens' behalf seeking clemency. The appeal was eventually denied. Former Los Angeles police officer Steve Hodel, who had spent 25 years in the force, met Heirens in 2003 when he was investigating the murders. He was convinced that Heirens was innocent of the crimes. I felt compelled to write an appeal to the Illinois Prisoner Review Board stating my professional belief that Heirens is innocent. Heirens' receipt parole hearing was held on July 26, 2007. The Illinois Prisoner Review Board decision in a 14-0 vote against parole was reflected by the board member, Thomas Johnson, who stated that God will forgive you, but the state won't. However, the parole board was also decided to revisit the issue once per year from then on. After being taken to the University of Illinois Medical Center on February 26, 2012, due to complications from diabetes, Heirens died March 5th, 2012, at the age of 83. So it sounds like there's no actual ruling to whether or not he committed it or not, and was just sitting in jail based on the little evidence and the tampered evidence and all that other stuff. So, that being said, thank you for joining me in today's episode of A Reason to Talk with Chris Reason. Check out our online store at ebay.com/str/Chris Reason Network to help support the podcast and the YouTube channel. Hit subscribe on the notification bell. Make sure you hit select all to stay up to date for when a new episode airs on YouTube. Otherwise, hit that follow button wherever you get your podcasts and hit like. Peace and bacon grease, guys. This is A Reason to Talk.